The final major building block that I'll cover in our journey are caveats. So caveats are a way to inline small amounts of attribute-based access control in a very relationship-based access control or reback native way. And the way caveats work is they make a relationship conditionally present. So heading back to my editor, what I mean by conditionally present is we might want a relationship to sometimes act as if it exists and sometimes not act as if it exists. So I'm going to come up with a very contrived example for when you might want to use a caveat. But I'm going to say for this contrived example that I'm going to add a new relation to document. And that relation is going to be called auditor. And that auditor is also going to be of type user. And I'm going to say for whatever reason that auditors are only allowed to audit on Tuesday. Or this auditor is only going to be an auditor on Tuesday. So in order to define on Tuesday, I'm going to create a caveat. So here I'm going to create a caveat, and the caveat is going to be called day of the week. And we're going to accept one parameter. Actually, we'll accept two parameters to day of the week. We will accept the requirement parameter, and that'll be of type string. And then we will accept current day of week, and that will also be of type string. Caveats in SpiceDB are defined as cell expressions, CEL, the common expression language. And here, I'm going to say that the expression for this caveat is that the requirement must equal the current day of the week. Okay, so that's it. That's defining the caveat. But in order for a caveat to take effect, we need to have the caveat actually referenced in our relationships. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our auditor relation, and we're going to add a caveat. And the way we express that this requires a caveat is that we say with day of the week. So now this relation is going to require us to express a caveat as well. So going over to our test relationships, we can add a document quarterly planning. We always do this quarterly planning. And we're going to add a relation for auditor. And we're going to say that the auditor is of type user. We're going to say the auditor. You'll notice that this is still highlighted in red because we have to actually have the caveat defined as well. So I'm no good at remembering the caveat syntax off the top of my head. So we're going to flip back over to the grid editor to add this. So here we can go into the auditor, and then here we can say that the caveat name is going to be day of the week. And then for the context are the values that get passed into this expression. So in this case, we have two values that we can pass in. And we have two opportunities to pass in those values. We can store some of these values alongside the relationship. We're going to do that for our requirement, right? So the auditor requirement is only going to be stored once with the relationship. And then we're going to pass in the current day of the week at request time as a different kind of context. So back to our test relationships, we have the context here. This is a JSON blob functionally. So here we're going to say that the requirement is Tuesday. Okay. So now we've got the context set up where we've got the requirement for Tuesday set up on the day of week caveat for the auditor. So now if we go back to our the last thing is that we actually have to use this auditor role. The auditor will only be allowed to read. So now the auditor, if we go back and we regenerate our permissions here, we see, I'll just get rid of some of this other stuff as noise, but we see that the auditor has these triple dots after it. What this means is that based on what context we pass in with the request, Sometimes the auditor will be able to view the document and sometimes the auditor won't. And we can actually test this with an assertion. So for our assertion, we're going to set this up with the minimal. This is a list of assertions, and we're going to say that, and these are also expressed in sort of the relationship format. So we're going to say that quarterly planning view for the auditor, user the auditor, and then I can barely ever remember the syntax for this, but I believe we pass syntax this way. And we're going to say that, what was the name of the parameter? It was current DOW. So we're going to say that current DOW is Tuesday. Okay. I've apparently made a mistake because of the syntax highlighting. That's what it is. I don't use brackets, I use the word with. So now we no longer have the error, and when we run our assertion, it's true. But we can also assert false. First, let's run this and make sure that it fails. Yep, it's failing. But if we change this to Wednesday, now we can see that they both assert the same way. So we've shown that on Tuesday, the person is considered an auditor, and on Wednesday, the person is not considered an auditor. We can do these same kinds of computations with numerical values. So we could define these as integers, and then we could compare them, or floating point values. Or we can use things like IP addresses and dates to make sure that users are only allowed access from a particular location or on a particular date. So this is a very powerful construct that we can use to bring in very small bits and build up what I like to call just enough policy to be able to make the correct decision at all times.